Last night's Jimmy Kimmel Live turned into chaos when comedy legend Will Ferrell walked off set after a brutal confrontation with the host over his political comedy career, leaving millions of viewers stunned and social media exploding with outrage. The atmosphere in the Hollywood Boulevard studio felt different from the moment Will Ferrell stepped onto the iconic stage. What should have been a routine promotional appearance for his latest Netflix comedy special quickly transformed into television's most uncomfortable moment of the year. The audience, packed with Ferrell's devoted fans, erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, completely unaware they were about to witness a career-defining confrontation that would dominate headlines for weeks. Kimmel, sporting his trademark smirk, wasted no time diving into what many are now calling an ambush interview. "Will, I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me," Kimmel began, his tone already carrying an edge that veteran talk show watchers immediately recognized as trouble. "You've built this massive career making people laugh, but lately it seems like you're more interested in lecturing Americans about politics than actually being funny." The camera captured Ferrell's expression, shifting from his usual good-natured smile to visible confusion. "I'm sorry, what are you referring to exactly?" Ferrell responded, maintaining his composure but clearly caught off guard by the aggressive opening. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Come on, Will. Your Saturday Night Live appearances, your awards show speeches, even your comedy specials now. It's all become this preachy, holier-than-thou commentary disguised as humor. Don't you think your fans deserve better than being lectured by another Hollywood elite?" The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Ferrell, a consummate professional with decades of experience handling difficult interviews, attempted to redirect the conversation. "Jimmy, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Comedy has always been about reflecting society and making people think while they laugh. That's what great comedians have done for generations." But Kimmel wasn't finished. He pulled out a tablet, clearly prepared for this moment. "Let me read you some quotes from your recent interviews," he said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "You called certain political movements dangerous to democracy and suggested that comedy needs to wake people up. That doesn't sound like the Will Ferrell who gave us Anchorman and Step Brothers. That sounds like someone who's forgotten what made him famous in the first place." The studio audience, initially enthusiastic, had fallen into an uncomfortable silence. Even the camera operators seemed to sense the tension, with close-ups revealing Ferrell's jaw tightening as he processed what was clearly a calculated attack on his integrity as both a comedian and a person. "Jimmy, I'm going to stop you right there," Ferrell said, his famous comedic timing replaced by the measured cadence of someone choosing their words very carefully. "I've been doing comedy for 30 years, and I've never once forgotten that my job is to make people laugh. But if you think that means I should stay silent about things that matter to me as a human being, then you fundamentally misunderstand what comedy is supposed to be about." Kimmel's response revealed the true nature of his intentions. "But see, that's exactly the problem, Will. You and your Hollywood friends think you know better than regular Americans. You live in your mansions, surrounded by people who agree with everything you say, and then you use your platform to tell truck drivers and teachers and nurses how they should think and vote. Isn't that a little hypocritical?" The personal attack struck deep, and for the first time in the interview, Ferrell's famous composure began to crack. His voice remained steady, but those familiar with his work could detect the anger building beneath the surface. "You want to talk about hypocrisy, Jimmy? Let's talk about a host who built his career on comedy and now uses his platform to ambush guests who trusted him enough to come on his show." The tension in the studio had become palpable. Audience members were looking at each other with expressions of disbelief, some pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. The show's producers, visible in the wings, appeared to be engaged in frantic discussions about whether to intervene. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he had pushed too far but unable to back down, doubled down on his attack. Trust goes both ways, Will. My audience trusts me to ask the tough questions, not to give celebrities a free pass to promote their political agendas. Maybe if you spent less time on Twitter criticizing half the country and more time working on actually funny material, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The accusation that his recent work wasn't funny hit Ferrell like a physical blow. Anyone who knew the comedian understood that his craft was everything to him, and questioning his comedic abilities was perhaps the most personal attack Kimmel could have launched. The camera captured the exact moment when Ferrell's professional mask finally slipped, revealing the genuine hurt and anger beneath. "You know what, Jimmy?" Ferrell said, his voice now carrying an edge that no one in that studio had ever heard from the usually jovial comedian. "I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a fun conversation with a fellow comedian about making people laugh during difficult times. Instead, I find myself being lectured by someone who apparently thinks ambushing guests makes for good television." The confrontation had reached a point of no return, with both men staring at each other across the desk like adversaries rather than colleagues in the entertainment industry. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what would soon become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. What happened next would shock America and forever change how people viewed both men. Ferrell slowly removed his microphone, the small gesture sending ripples of anticipation through the studio. "You want to know what's really hypocritical, Jimmy?" he said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that made everyone lean forward. "A comedian who's forgotten that comedy is supposed to bring people together, not tear them apart for ratings." Kimmel's face flushed red as he realized his carefully planned ambush was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of the defensive, stammering response he'd expected, Ferrell was methodically dismantling his host's credibility on live television. "Don't lecture me about comedy, Will. I've been doing this show for 20 years. I know what works." "20 years of what exactly?" Ferrell shot back, his famous deadpan delivery now weaponized with surgical precision. "20 years of punching down at guests who trusted you? 20 years of mistaking cruelty for humor? Because that's not comedy, Jimmy. That's just bullying with a studio audience." The accusation hit Kimmel like a sledgehammer. His signature confidence cracked visibly as he struggled to regain control of his own show. "You're being ridiculous, Will. This is what real interviews look like. Not everyone gets to control the narrative like you Hollywood types are used to." Ferrell stood up abruptly, towering over the desk, and Kimmel's suddenly diminished figure. The camera operators scrambled to adjust their angles, capturing every second of what was rapidly becoming television history. "Real interviews?" Ferrell's voice rose for the first time, his anger finally breaking through. "Real interviews are about genuine curiosity and respect. What you've done tonight is perform a character assassination disguised as journalism." The studio audience was completely silent now, some covering their mouths in shock, others recording frantically on their phones. Social media was already exploding as clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire across platforms. The hashtag Kimmel vs. Ferrell began trending within minutes. Kimmel, desperate to salvage his position, made the fatal mistake of escalating further. "Character assassination? You're the one who abandoned comedy for political activism. You turned your back on the fans who made you famous just so you could virtue signal to your elite friends. At least I'm honest about what I am." The personal attack crossed a line that even Kimmel's most loyal fans couldn't defend. Ferrell's expression shifted from anger to something far more dangerous: complete contempt. "Honest?" he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You want to talk about honesty? Let's be honest about what this really is." He gestured toward the cameras, addressing not just Kimmel, but the millions watching at home. "This isn't an interview. This is a desperate man trying to create viral content by destroying someone else's reputation. This is what happens when a host confuses controversy with relevance." Kimmel's attempts to interrupt were futile, as Ferrell continued his devastating counterattack. You talk about my fans? My fans know that I've never once compromised my values for a laugh. They know that real comedy comes from truth, not from tearing others down. But your fans, what are you teaching them, Jimmy? That it's okay to ambush people? That humiliation is entertainment? The host's face had gone pale, beads of sweat visible under the studio lights. His signature smugness had evaporated, replaced by panic, as he realized the interview had spiraled completely beyond his control. Will, let's just take a step back here. No, Ferrell cut him off with unprecedented authority. You wanted this confrontation. You planned this attack. You brought me here under false pretenses, thinking you could embarrass me on national television. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. You got your viral moment. But it's not going to be the one you expected. The comedian's words hung in the air like an indictment. Even the production crew had stopped their usual behind-the-scenes movements, everyone transfixed by the unprecedented destruction of a late-night host's credibility in real time. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Look, Will, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't we start over and talk about your new special? The suggestion was met with a look of such pure disdain that several audience members audibly gasped. Ferrell shook his head slowly, his disappointment palpable. Start over. You think after what you've done tonight, after the disrespect you've shown not just to me but to your audience, that we can just pretend this didn't happen? He turned toward the audience, many of whom were nodding in agreement with his assessment. Ladies and gentlemen, you came here tonight expecting to be entertained by two professionals who respect each other and respect you. Instead, you've been forced to witness something ugly and calculated. You deserve better than this. The applause that erupted from the audience was spontaneous and thunderous, a clear indication of where their sympathies lay. Kimmel sat frozen, behind his desk, watching his carefully constructed persona crumble in real time. Ferrell turned back to face his host one final time, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Jimmy, I genuinely feel sorry for you. Comedy is supposed to heal, to bring joy, to help people cope with life's difficulties. What you've done tonight is the opposite of everything our profession should represent. The studio fell silent again, as everyone sensed the confrontation reaching its climax. What Ferrell would do next would determine not just the fate of this particular show, but potentially reshape the entire landscape of late-night television. Ferrell took a deep breath, his composure returning as he prepared to deliver what would become one of the most quoted speeches in television history. You know, Jimmy, when I started in comedy, I had mentors who taught me that our job isn't just to make people laugh. It's to make them think, to challenge assumptions, and most importantly, to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual confidence completely shattered. The cameras captured every bead of sweat, every nervous twitch, as America watched a masterclass in professional destruction unfold in real time. Those mentors taught me that comedy is a sacred trust between performer and audience, Ferrell continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. When people invite us into their homes, when they trust us with their time and attention, we have a responsibility to honor that trust. What you've done tonight is betray that trust in the most fundamental way possible. The audience began to murmur in agreement, their initial shock giving way to vocal support for Ferrell's position. Someone in the back shouted, "Tell him, Will," which sparked a wave of applause that Kimmel couldn't suppress, despite frantically gesturing to his producers. Ferrell raised his hand, quieting the crowd with the natural authority of someone who had commanded stages for 3 decades. But this isn't really about me, is it, Jimmy? This is about a pattern of behavior that your viewers have been subjected to for years. How many guests have sat in this chair and been blindsided by your need to create conflict where none existed? The question hung in the air like an accusation that everyone in the studio knew was true. Kimmel's reputation for ambush interviews was well documented, but seeing it dissected so methodically on his own show was unprecedented. "I've watched your show, Jimmy. I've seen you tear down actors promoting their movies, musicians trying to share their art, authors discussing their books. You've turned hospitality into hostility, conversation into confrontation. And for what? A few extra clicks? A trending hashtag?" Kimmel attempted to defend himself, his voice cracking with desperation. "That's not... I mean, comedy has always been about pushing boundaries. People expect honesty," Ferrell interrupted, his tone cutting through Kimmel's excuses like a blade. "They expect authenticity. They expect to be treated like intelligent human beings, not like an audience at a gladiator match. What they don't expect is to watch their host destroy his guests for sport." The comedian began pacing behind his chair, his movement commanding every camera angle. "You want to know what real comedy looks like? It's about finding the absurdity in life without destroying the people living it. It's about making people laugh with you, not at someone else's expense. It's about building up, not tearing down." Social media was exploding as clips of Ferrell's speech spread across every platform. The hashtags "Respect in Comedy" and "Ferrell Speaks the Truth" were trending worldwide. Late-night television personalities were already commenting, with many expressing support for Ferrell's stance. Kimmel made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Will, I think you're overreacting. This is just television. It's entertainment. Nobody takes this stuff seriously." The response was swift and devastating. Ferrell stopped pacing and turned to face Kimmel directly, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "Nobody takes it seriously? Jimmy, your words reach millions of people every night. Your behavior influences how people treat each other. Your example shapes what society considers acceptable discourse." He gestured toward the audience, his voice rising with passion. "These people came here tonight expecting to laugh, to forget their troubles for an hour, to feel connected to something positive. Instead, you've shown them that cruelty is entertainment, that humiliation is funny, that respect is optional." The studio audience erupted in sustained applause, many rising to their feet in support. Even some of the production crew were nodding in agreement, their professional detachment cracking in the face of Ferrell's moral authority. "You talk about boundaries, Jimmy? Here's a boundary: treating guests with basic human decency. Here's another boundary: using your platform to elevate rather than destroy. Here's one more: remembering that comedy is supposed to heal, not harm." Kimmel sat frozen, his face a mask of humiliation, as his own audience turned against him. The cameras captured every moment of his professional destruction, broadcast live to millions of viewers who were witnessing the complete collapse of a carefully constructed television persona. Ferrell's voice softened, but the impact was no less devastating. "I genuinely hope that someday you remember why you got into comedy in the first place. I hope you rediscover the joy of making people laugh without making them cry. I hope you find your way back to being someone who builds bridges instead of burning them." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual background noise of the studio had ceased as everyone processed the complete moral victory Ferrell had achieved. Kimmel's attempt to ambush a guest had backfired so spectacularly that it would be studied in communications classes for years to come. Ferrell picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, the simple gesture carrying enormous weight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the audience directly, "thank you for your time tonight. I'm sorry your evening was disrupted by this unfortunate display. You deserved better entertainment than watching someone's career implode in real time." The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming. Standing ovation after standing ovation rolled through the studio as Ferrell prepared to make his exit. But first, he had one final message that would cement his victory and Kimmel's defeat. Ferrell turned one last time to face the cameras, speaking directly to the millions of viewers watching at home. His voice carried the weight of 3 decades. In entertainment, the authority of someone who had earned his place in comedy history through talent and integrity, rather than controversy and cruelty. To everyone watching tonight, I want you to know that this isn't what comedy is supposed to look like. This isn't what respect looks like. This isn't what professionalism looks like. His eyes moved briefly to Kimmel, who sat slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. But it is what accountability looks like. The words hit with the force of a final judgment. Social media exploded as clips of the statement went viral within seconds. The hashtag Will Ferrell accountability began trending immediately, joined by Kimmel exposed and respect in entertainment. Ferrell adjusted his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. I've spent my entire career trying to bring joy to people's lives. I've made movies that families watch together, performed on stages that bring communities together, and told jokes that help people forget their troubles, even if just for a moment. That's what comedy should do. He paused, letting the contrast with Kimmel's behavior sink in for everyone watching. What you witnessed tonight was the opposite of everything our industry should represent. You saw someone use their platform, not to entertain, but to destroy. Not to elevate, but to humiliate. Not to bring people together, but to divide them for ratings. Kimmel made one final pathetic attempt to regain control. Will, this has gotten way out of hand. Can't we just— No, Jimmy. Ferrell's interruption was swift and final. This got out of hand the moment you decided to ambush a guest who came here in good faith. This got out of hand when you chose cruelty over kindness. This got out of hand when you forgot that the people watching deserve better than what you've become. The studio audience erupted again, their applause drowning out any response Kimmel might have attempted. The cameras captured his complete defeat, his face a mixture of humiliation and disbelief at how thoroughly his planned ambush had backfired. Ferrell began walking toward the exit, but stopped at the edge of the stage area. To the incredible audience here tonight, thank you for your patience during this unfortunate display. You came here expecting entertainment and professionalism. You deserved both, and I'm sorry you only got one. The ovation that followed was the longest in the show's history. People were on their feet, cheering not just for Ferrell's performance, but for his principled stand against the toxic culture that had infected late-night television. Some audience members were openly emotional, moved by witnessing someone stand up for basic human decency on such a public stage. As Ferrell reached the exit, he delivered his final blow with the precision of a master craftsman. Jimmy, I hope someday you remember that comedy is supposed to be about joy, not destruction. Until then, maybe consider whether your current approach is really serving your audience or just feeding your ego. With that, Will Ferrell walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a host whose credibility lay in ruins and an audience that had witnessed television history. The cameras lingered on Kimmel's devastated expression before cutting to commercial, but the damage was irreversible. Within hours, social media was flooded with support for Ferrell and condemnation of Kimmel's conduct. Celebrity after celebrity voiced their support for Ferrell's stance, with many sharing their own experiences of being ambushed by hostile hosts. The entertainment industry rallied around the comedian who had taken a stand against the toxic culture of manufactured controversy. The show's ratings plummeted in the following weeks as sponsors pulled their support, and viewers abandoned the program in droves. Kimmel's desperate attempts to apologize and explain were met with widespread skepticism. His carefully constructed image as America's lovable late-night host had been completely destroyed by his own actions, and Ferrell's masterful response. Industry insiders immediately recognized the confrontation as a watershed moment. The era of ambush interviews and hostile questioning disguised as entertainment began to crumble as other hosts realized that audiences were tired of cruelty masquerading as comedy. Talk shows across the network landscape started emphasizing respect and genuine conversation over manufactured conflict. Ferrell, meanwhile, saw his reputation soar to new heights. His principled stand had demonstrated that true strength comes not from tearing others down, but from maintaining one's values under pressure. His comedy special, which he had originally come to promote, became the most watched comedy release of the year as audiences flocked to support someone who had shown such integrity. The confrontation became required viewing in entertainment and communications programs across the country. Students studied it as an example of how to handle hostile interviews, how to maintain dignity under attack, and how one person's courage can change an entire industry culture. Late-night television would never be the same. The Kimmel-Ferrell confrontation had drawn a line in the sand, separating those who used their platforms to build up from those who used them to tear down. And on that night, in front of millions of viewers, Will Ferrell had shown America what real comedy leadership looked like. The man who had made the nation laugh for decades had given them something even more valuable, a reminder that entertainment should elevate the human spirit, not destroy it. In walking off that stage, Ferrell hadn't just left a television show. He had walked into history as the comedian who reminded an entire industry of its better angels.